Hello and welcome to a Topic a Month podcast where we take one topic a month and split it into weekly segments. This minicast is effectively going to be part 2 of the Get a Driver's Car. So, congratulations listeners, you've downloaded the first minicast enough to make me do part 2. Now for the local business that you all should check out, Zenith City Restoration. Jake over at ZCR does a lot of custom work from fabrication, painting, sandblasting, and building. Specializing in all things automotive, he does wheels, valve covers, complete teardown and restoration of motorcycles, bicycles, and if you schmooze him enough, he'll fit in snowblower restoration. Definitely check out his page and his quality work and craftsmanship on his Facebook page. So where did we leave off on the last one? Other than ranting against that which is General Motors in its entirety, sure, they have some good stuff, and sure, they have plenty of dog shit, but I think it went a little further than that. Covered the cars, which would be fun to have, and covered my own personal favorite, but let's get a little more into it. Let's go on a bit of a crusade with vehicles I personally owned, and maybe some that I drove over the course of my having a license. Everybody remembers their first vehicle, Everybody does. From your grandmother to your kid sister and that weird guy down the block that oogles over his maroon and royal blue Buick. My very first vehicle was a Dodge Dakota. It was. The plans and the wants and needs, but not knowing how to do any of it, and not knowing the actual required work that would have to go into it to get it perfect, it was basically just dreaming of making it perfect. The plans, the wants and needs, but not knowing how to do any of it and not knowing the actual required work that would have to go into it to get it perfect. This is pre-power. It was all about the looks for me. It was an 88 N body in black with, of course, a kick-ass stripe down each side of the body. Okay, it wasn't really as cool as I remember it looking back at some old pictures. Yeah, it's not really that cool, but it was an 88, so that was the style at the time. For those of you who don't know, and I'm assuming there's plenty out there because who really knows body codes outside of muscle cars, the N body was a Dodge Dakota, the mid-size truck that they actually came out with in 87. This truck was, it was basically a good in-between to the full-size pickups that America had, and a slightly larger option than what Japan had. Ultimately, the mini trucks offered by GM and Ford at the time, like the S10, the Sonoma, and the Ranger, so it did fit that little bit of a niche. You could get smaller pickups and pickups that weren't really pickups, but basically just a K car with a bed on the back, like the Dodge Rampage. The Mighty Max was an actual pickup, however, at the same time, it was along the lines of the Toyota pickup and the Nissan D-Series. So Dodge actually did hit it with the Dakota. Essentially, it was a quarter-ton frame, enough room in the cab not to be cramped, and ample ground clearance if you did have the four-wheel drive. It was a great truck. It was incredibly reliable. It could haul anything that I needed at the time. Not that I really did haul anything for it. Single cab was a little small. Not that I was a big guy, but 210s behind the seat made scooting up to the steering wheel a little more cramped. Yeah, 210s in a single cab. Never even got to flex the coils enough. I was that guy. Anyway, this truck was my first, and being my first vehicle, I loved the hell out of it. She was a stick, rear-wheel drive, and I didn't know anything about maintenance at the time. Oil changes? I don't know. I pumped gas, and that was about the extent of it, but the truck was great. It allowed me to dream, and I dreamt of lowering it, not scraping on the ground, no big wheels, no engine or transmission mods, no go-fast parts, no help slow down parts. Just drop it 4 inches and tuck the wheels a little bit. That's about all I knew, and that's just what I wanted from seeing lowriders. I eventually got a leveling block kit for the rear. Not that I knew how to put it on. Remember, I never did an oil change at this point in my life. After the good old pickup, I wanted to get something that was a little more fun. I wanted to get a car, something to blast around in. So I found another car in the Twin Cities. Drove down there to pick it up. It was a 1990 Dodge Daytona ES. This submodel had the Mitsubishi built, Chrysler designed 3-liter V6. It is a 6G7 too. Basically, it has different heads on it, but the block and everything else is the same. It was the same engine that came in the Caravan and basically every other passenger car Chrysler put on the market. But it was a Daytona, a real-life predecessor in name only to the actual Dodge Daytona, the muscle car, but it definitely wasn't muscle with a little V6 under the hood. It was glass-packed and stick-shift. So sure, she was prior to Altezza tails. This was prior to LEDs, prior to having basically no aftermarket support for the body, let alone the engine on it. Still at this point, I knew nothing of cars, just that they were fun. The power steering pump eventually seized up on it. I parked it and sold it to someone in Zimmerman, Minnesota. Retrospect, I could have definitely fixed the problem or found a shorter belt, but either way, I hadn't the slightest clue on how to do it. I didn't even own tools at this point. So it's probably in the scrapyard right now. I'm sure it's completely rusted through. While in the cities, I was delivering pizza and the Daytona ate it, so my friend let me know that his aunt was selling her car. This car is what really got me into the Japanese scene, but it wasn't really much of a car. It was more of a rental vehicle than anything. It was a 94 Nissan Altima, and it was bluish. I don't know what you could call that. No, not topaz. That weird blue-green rust color. Anyway, it was a stick shift too. Of course, they pretty much all have been, save for 2 cars that I've had. So let me tell you that the subs actually do fit in the trunk very well in comparison to the pickup. The clutch was shit on it, the mileage was good, and surprisingly comfortable for having 120,000 miles of butt ruining the upholstery on the seats. The interior was gray, had power windows, power locks, but I eventually hit a deer in Grand Marais. So I sold it to a friend, and then he eventually ditched it in Lutsen. Slid right through Highway 61 coming off the mountain. It got totaled. That's the end of an era for saloon cars for me. I don't think I've had one since. But man, that thing was actually pretty good. Coupled with the KE24DE, that was a pretty stout motor. At the time, they weren't really doing anything with the KE24DEs. So if you had a 240 with that 2.4 in it, you'd probably just swap it out for an SR20 DET, the turbo one. Mostly just because it's a slightly larger, slightly lighter, but more so it can handle the boost really well until people figured out how to build a KE24, in which case they use that a little bit more often now. All right, so this next part begins my love for small cars, K cars basically. That's KEI, city cars, not the Chrysler K chassis. Not that I don't love all those K cars though. Geo Metros, fuck yes. Tiny, great gas mileage, and terribly frightening to drive on the highway with them. The first one I had was a 98. Got it from my aunt. It was a stick. It had the 3 cylinders of Fury underneath the hood, the G10, 1 liter. And this thing's transmission went out after a few months. Or the clutch gave up, or the cable snapped, or the famous exhaust valve finally burnt up on cylinder 3. This one ended up in the hands of her friend, who also had a Metro. He tossed his spare tranny in it, and off he went. So he got a car for basically nothing because I didn't want to have to deal with it, and finding a transmission for it and putting it in would have taken a little while. So after the incident with the Nissan, I found the car that started my love for modifying, the Genesis, the one and only super slow Eclipse. But the car's thermostat stuck closed and I blew a head gasket. So I found an engine, put it in, and off she went. Yeah, the thermostat of all things, caused me to finally learn how to turn a wrench. It wasn't until after the engine swap of that Eclipse that I first did the oil change on it. So I learned a little backwards, swap an engine, then change some oil. So eventually I moved back to Grand Marais from the cities area. The Eclipse ended up losing compression while I was living up there. Spun a rod bearing, knocked like crazy. So I parked it. She sat, lost a lot of body on it, and gained a lot of rust in return. Since I did need a vehicle, my parents came through and gifted me their old 88 Caravan CV. This Caravan used to be a panel van with the barn doors in back, but when we eventually took it out west, we needed to get some windows on it, so my dad actually put Caravan windows in the entire thing. It did have the 3-speed auto, but it was supposed to be a 4-speed, but it only had 3 because it lost a gear. With the V6 on it, so it was the same V6 that the Daytona had. It had been in the family for a long time, but it used as a work van where my dad worked at the time in Lutzen at Caribou Highlands. So the employees there beat the shit out of this thing. It had 2 gears when I got it. Eventually it lost another, so it only had, I can't remember if it only had first or if it only had second. In anyway, you could only do like 20 on it. Chrysler wasn't really known for their autos. She had no heat, the driver window wouldn't roll, and it was wood shim to stay closed. The passenger door and sliding door didn't close fully either, but hey, she was transportation and she could fit a snowboard in the back, so that was good enough. Onward and moving back down to the cities. There's a lot of moving in this era of my life. This is Metro number 2. It was in 1994, I believe. Stick shift, of course. If you have a Metro, you'll know that the diagram in the Chilton's manual for the firing order on the distributor cap is incorrect. I didn't know that and wondered why she ran like shit after doing a tune-up. I figured it was the bad valve again, so she got sold. But not before taking out 2 bolts on the passenger seat, dumping the clutch to see my friend fly into the back seat. It was planned and goddamn hilarious. I suggest you do it, not on the highway, and be safe about it, as safe as you possibly can be. Fuck, it's funny though. While living in Andover, with quite a few roommates, in an awesome house and location, unfortunately my father passed away. I inherited his 01 Ford Ranger XLT. It was power everything, 4-wheel drive V6, high miles on it, but it was a good solid truck. It really was. And then a month later, a young girl runs a red light and smashes into the truck, into the backside of it. She hit it fast enough where the frame twisted from it, so I get about maybe a $4,500 check from the truck. So I find a DSM, a car that begs to be tuned, played with, and driven hard. It was fantastic. It was a 1990 Talon TSI all-wheel drive. Had a big 16G. Eventually I put a front mount on it, 450cc injectors, DSM link, 255 Walbro, KYB GR2s, iBox springs, 3-inch turbo back, Greddy blow-off, 17-inch Mustang GT wheels. It could run 20 PSI all day on that engine. It loved boost. She didn't need a professional tune, but for the most part, she was great. The all-wheel drive, man, handling for days. If you ever want to experience some tail-happy all-wheel drive, drive a DSM in winter. Put stock wheels on it, and you've got so much control, it's ridiculous. You can throttle steer constantly with that car in winter. That car, I had the longest out of all of them so far. So you know what happens next? Moving day. Again, back up to Grand Marais. So the Talon took a bit of a dive while I was up there, traveling on Highway 61. There was unmarked road construction. A huge fucking piece of the road was torn up. It had a dip and ended up compressing the springs so far that we hit our heads on the roof in the Talon. It was about a 6-inch drop It was massive. It was dropped down and then right back up to pavement. The car was basically undrivable. It had no clutch movement. It couldn't engage in any of the gears whatsoever. The don't start much turned into a don't shift much. We tow it home. I find a cheap but extremely reliable pickup. I'm telling you, if you find an 86 Jeep Comanche, it's the way to go. Rotted out floorboard, 2.5 four-cylinder AMC engine. It was 4 on the floor and 4-wheel drive. It looked like hell. The gas gauge didn't work. The heat was awesome. And the term rusty and trusty was made after this pickup decided to show itself to the public. It was a fucking awesome truck. They are hard to find now, unfortunately. Basically, if you haven't seen a Comanche, take a Jeep Cherokee around the same year, just a standard boxy Cherokee, lop the back windows off right after the front seats, and turn the rest of it into a truck bed. That's a Comanche. It looks the same. I remember seeing one of them when I was a kid, maybe 5 years old, and I fell in love immediately. I've wanted one, and then I got one. She lasted a long time, and as far as I know, she's still driving around somewhere in South End, Wisconsin. After that, I did get a car while I was up there, too. A shitbox Cavalier. It was a 3-speed auto, lots of miles, holes everywhere, but it did have the good 2.2 overhead valve. It is not the Iron Duke 2.2, but it was still a solid engine. I did hate the car, of course, as is tradition. I sold it for next to nothing because I hated it so much. Loathed entirely. I don't know if there's anything more to say about that Cav. Probably not. Come the following spring, after saving up some money for the Talon, I had Ma step on the clutch, just out of curiosity to see if it was the clutch fork that let go or something internal. It turns out that the bump from the previous fall knocked a couple of bolts loose. Yeah, seriously, on the transmission bell housing. They backed out far enough where when the clutch was pushed, it moved the entire transmission back off of the engine. So I tightened the bolts up and she was drivable again. At this point in time, Grand Marais, I found my future wife, obnoxious as she was, is, and forever will be. Still love struck though. We eventually moved down to Duluth, and let me tell you, the car scene is a hell of a lot better than the car scene way up north. I traded the Comanche for a daily driver 91 Mitsubishi Eclipse GST. This is DSM number 3. It's completely stock. Had some nice get up and go. Had it for a few months before the balance shaft belt shredded, causing the timing belt to jump and shred. Thank you, balance shaft belt. Thanks. There goes one engine. And wouldn't you believe it, but the belt on the Talon went soon after that. 2 DSMs down in the span of 2 months. Scrapped the Eclipse, sold the Talon. It was at this point that I didn't really have much money to repair either, and finding a good solid 4G63T was slim to none that didn't have a lot of miles or require a rebuild on it. Basically, out of a vehicle, we had to scramble and find a Chevy Metro. Remember how I ragged on Chevs previously? Well, this Metro was a Chevy in badge only. Like all the Metros of the past, it was actually a Suzuki underneath. The Swift is called everywhere else. This thing was cheap, wobbly, rusty, and dangerous. Most of the interior was stripped down. It had a board in the back for a seat. The rear wheel bearings were garbage, so garbage the girlfriend, who was going to be the future wife, couldn't believe it held together going from Superior, Wisconsin over the Bong Bridge into Duluth. So time to get to work on this little thing. New wheel bearings in the rear, fluid changers, thermostat plugs, wires, cap, rotor in the right order this time, as we learned from the last Metro. Brakes all around, straight exhaust because it rusted right off after the cat, and some expanding foam to keep the rust out. She was a beater with a heater, and a terrible beater. But she ran, got terrible gas mileage from the dead number 3 cylinder, and was frightening to drive. Frightening enough at low speeds, not that you could get going fast enough that it made it one of the most fun cars to sling around the corners. Sure, it was a tin can with pizza cutter wheels, but driving a slow car fast is more enjoyable than driving a fast car slow. You got to open up the engine, let the legs stretch, and give it the beans at every corner. You only went 45 around them, but that was certainly fast enough in this tippy little thing. Of course, the Metro started to get worse and worse. The lack of power got more lacking, and finding an engine would be relatively easy, but finding an engine with great compression on every cylinder would be next to impossible for what the car was actually worth. The Metros of every generation had a flaw where the control arm's body mount underneath the driver and passenger A-pillar would rust out from all the salt and road grime that the wheels splashed up. There's a little pocket that basically just holds all the salt and the rust and the water and everything, and just corrodes it right out. So this one was basically gone at this point in time. So it's time to find another vehicle. We needed a truck, four-wheel drive preferably, and without a doubt a manual transmission. So as long as it wasn't a full-size or a Chevy, would pretty much take anything, and full circle we came. We found a Dakota, a 91 V6 5-speed four-wheel drive with a grandpa topper and a grandpa bug guard on it. To some people, getting a quarter-ton pickup is a waste, but I mean, really, what are you going to carry with it? Not much, and that's the point. You'll often see people driving brand new trucks without carrying a damn thing in the back of it. Not a thing. Short beds, quad cabs, tonneau cover, and horrid wheels is basically all the brand new trucks that you see out there. That's what they have. But nothing in the back. No tow hitch, no scratch on the damn thing. Nothing. It's pristine. It's not a pickup. If you're going to buy a truck, buy it for its utilitarian use. It's meant to haul things. So haul things. Now, when I say I don't carry much with the pickup, simply that it can't carry much as a half-ton or a bigger truck, but it sure can carry a bed, a couch, a fridge. It can carry Class 5 and anything else that I need it for. The truck is a perfect fit for my needs, and I won't get anything larger because anything larger is just ridiculous and ludicrous. It doesn't need to be anything bigger than a quarter-ton for most people. So, seems like we need the manufacturers to start making some more quarter-ton mid-sized pickups after all. Half-tons aren't going to be used hauling bricks like they show in the commercials. They'll be for hauling groceries and soccer kids. I still do have the Dakota. It needs work, but it'll last and last, I'm sure. The engine is bulletproof, much like the Jeep 4-liter. Iron heads and a block will do that. The transmission is good, and the four-wheel drive is fantastic for winter in Duluth. If there were one thing, it would be the need for an extended cab, but what do you do? Try and find one in a relatively good condition as mine is in the year that I was looking for. It's really hard to find an extended cab Dakota. And if you find one in a short box, well, you can't because they only came long box. It took about 13 years to get the car that, to me, is the epitome of a driver's car. No, it's not the Dakota. Perfectly balanced, incredible handling, and timeless style. An NA6 Miata. I've gone full hairdresser apparently. Seriously though, the Miata, it sold 1 million of them. Literally, there's 1 million Miatas in the world right now. It is the best-selling roadster ever produced. This car is slow, but that's the point. You're not meant to go fast in a straight line with a Miata. You can, but that's not the point of the Roadster. A Roadster is for driving. Pitting the car against the pavement, using what skill you have as a driver to make the experience of feeling the road that much more unique. This is a car made for enthusiasts. A car made for throwing into the corners and coming out that much happier, although a little frightened. A car made for beginning drivers, a car made for advanced drivers. This is a car that fits everyone. This is a car made for a driver. You can trundle along in your Buicks and your Tauruses and in your Intrepids. You can softly drive to work on a pillow in your Olds, your Caddies, and your Infinities. But when you get your little cockpit, step into your 4 round rubber shoes and lay hands upon the leather-wrapped wheel in front of you, your experience of driving changes. No matter how novice you are at that moment, going around that turn faster than you would in any other car, wanting that tail end to flutter just a little, to make your heart skip enthusiastically, to sweat just a little, gives you a need to do it again. To make that moment last just a little longer in that car, in that vehicle of excitement. That's what a driver's car is. Thank you again. I hope you like this minicast of part 2 to Get a Driver's Car. As always, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at A Topic a Month, or email us at atopicamonth@gmail.com. I'd definitely like to thank everyone out in Virginia for pulling all the downloads. That's pretty awesome. And the listeners in Japan, Switzerland, and Denmark now, that's pretty neat. If you like this topic for a minicast, write in. We'll do some more. But if you're feeding some more car-related podcasts, definitely check out Cartastrophe 365 on iTunes. It's Cartastrophe 365 on iTunes. They got a lot of great guys on there that do a lot of information on vehicles and how to fix it. I definitely check them out. Thanks, everyone, and have a good night.